Mr. Yarton isn't funny. Like he has to laugh at his own jokes because no one else does. That's not funny.
Mrs. Barrow thinks I'm gonna do my homework over the weekend. She's hecka cray.
Mr. Olsberg's chem class makes me want to drink 500 gallons of cyanide and pour sulfuric acid into my eyes simultaneously.
Does Mr. Wheatley have a degree in math or in solitaire?
I thought Miss Fern was a new student, but I found out that she's a French teacher. Hashtag dang it.
Our case study was What Should Be the Role of the Student Newspaper, presented by Rhonda Collier, Carla Dalton, Katie Elrod, and William Davis. First, let's learn a little bit of background about this case study. The student editors of the Riverside student newspaper, The Sword, wrote negative editorials about the guidance department and later the teachers. In the first edition, it was negative about the counselors. The second edition was negative regarding the teachers. The principal has received complaints from the counselor and staff and has been asked to carry out disciplinary actions. The staff has also proposed that all future articles be screened prior to future publications. While reviewing the case study, 3 major problems or issues were found. The first issue is that faculty and staff expressed concerns about negative discourse over the student newspaper editorials that pertain to the staff. The second issue is under what circumstances can the school district censor student news without violating students' First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and press? And lastly, can administrators discipline students over the editorial content already published in the second edition? We felt that the issue was serious enough that it needed to be addressed by the third edition of the newspaper. The publication should be reviewed by designated faculty members. The people involved were the student editors, the guidance department, which consisted of the counselors, the principal, teachers, and the student body after reading the editorials. The place was at Riverside School, and the program was the journalism department, which included the newspaper and any other student publications. The first alternative action is to set clear expectations for the content of the newspaper. The second alternative action is to appoint a review committee or teacher to review the publication prior to print. The third alternative action is to follow the case Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer, 1988, and state in the policy that schools may limit the personal expression of students if their speech can be perceived to bear imprimatur of the school. Censorship of school-sponsored student expression is permissible when school officials can show that it is reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns. The fourth alternative is to address student concerns with the staff by sitting down with students and staff to discuss expectations. Our next alternative was to suspend the publication of the newspaper, which nobody really wants to do in this case. Another alternative was to pick a different journalism advisor who is committed to carrying out proper monitoring of student editorials. And lastly, our last alternative is to have students issue an apology if any untrue or hurtful statements were written. The central problems of this case were the negative discourse over the student newspaper editorials. Based on the options addressed in the prior section, we have chosen to address the problems in 2 ways. Our first course of action is to not discipline students regarding the editorial published in the second edition of the student publication. No policy was put in place pertaining to prior review of the student publications. Therefore, student discipline is not appropriate in this case. Our second course of action is to establish a policy of review for any future student publications. In order to carry out appropriate courses of action, proper operations must first be put in place. Priority is given to establishing policy for staff review of any future student publications. The administrator will establish a committee to set expectations for proper content of newspaper and procedures for prior review of newspaper content. The committee will consist of select students, faculty, and administrators. After guidelines are suggested, the administrator will review suggestions made to ensure local, state, and federal policies or laws are not violated. After policy has been written, it must be ran up the chain of command and adopted using proper procedures already set forth under district policy. Once policy has been written and adopted, the campus administrator will appoint a faculty member or committee to carry out proper review of student content prior to publications. The campus administrator will also call in student writers to clearly communicate policies and expectations. To prevent further occurrences of the problems addressed above, the biggest procedural change that can be made is putting in place new policy for faculty review of student content prior to publication. Had policies and clear expectations about content and review been in place before, the negative discourse over the paper would not have happened. In addition, the principal would have a clear path of action when it came to problems regarding the student newspaper. Proactive measures like the ones lined out in written plan of action are always the best way to prevent a majority of future issues.